Daniyar, if we talk about the new geopolitical reality in the Central Asia, what are the main factors that shape the changing paradigm of relations and of the challenges for the region in the last, let's say, 2-3 years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there are plenty of factors which actually could lead us to say that we face a new geopolitical reality in Central Asia. First of all, it stems from the fact that the oil prices are getting low, and our economy is being affected by the structural changes we see in the energy market during last years, which is about the shale revolution as well. In terms of security and in terms of hard politics, we see that Afghanistan is again returning back to the agenda, because after the Ukrainian crisis, Central Asian states mostly were focused on this crisis, but there is now news that ISIS is gaining foothold in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. So that is why we should again return back to this issue, and it creates a new momentum of the cooperation between Central Asian states, and it creates a new stimulus for cooperation between world powers such as Russia, China, and US as well. And there is another fact, which is the Eurasian Economic Union. It was in 2015 we signed a Eurasian Economic Union. But you know, there is some important thing that before the Ukrainian crisis and after the Ukrainian crisis had been occurred, the two different realities had been emerged in the region, in the Eurasian region. When we were trying to establish the Eurasian Economic Union in 2011, we were considering that our relations with the West and with all the states, with all the other regions, would be the same, would be in the normal shape. But after the Ukrainian crisis and after the sanctions against Russia, we are reconsidering our approach to other states, and Russia is reconsidering its relations with the West. So that is why we should definitely consider that we are living in a new environment, and it is affecting very much the economic viability of the Eurasian Economic Union, and it is one of the tests we see now the Union is facing.
For your opinion, what is shaping this reality more? The internal factors, the internal developments of the states, because Afghanistan in some way that is internal development of one of the states, or the external actors who would like to play some role in the Central Asian region?
I think it is both, and they are intertwined, because the Central Asia itself during the 20 years had experienced a sort of a social change, because there is a new reality in terms of the generation has been born as the generation of the independence, and they can think in contrast to the older generation in a different terms, for example. And they regard themselves, first of all, as a Kazakh or as an Uzbek, not as a sort of a part of the Central Asian region or the Eurasian region. And there are, of course, external factors, which we know the China comes with its economic belt of Silk Road, which is really active in the region, and while our economy is getting worse or we have troubles, we are more sort of becoming dependent on Chinese investments and Chinese projects.
How do you feel if you compare China and Russia position? Do they act with a similar tools, with a similar, let's say, mechanisms towards the countries of Central Asia, or would they like to gain the same to shape this reality? Or their perceptions are completely different, and in some way it will be up to the Central Asian countries to make a choice which way to make?
Well, I think Russia is regarded, first of all, as a traditional power in Central Asia, and everyone accepts that it has its own interest in the region, and it has a political leverage as well. But when we look to China, first of all comes economy, and they have a long-term perspective. And actually they are trying to turn their economic leverage into a political leverage, and I think it will be more influential in upcoming years. But I think there is also a seeds of a cooperation between these powers in Central Asia, because Russia could provide a military security and could provide a sort of political influence, and Chinese could invest more economically. So that is why a division of labor could be created in Central Asia. But it should not mean that in other topics, in other areas, they will cooperate as in Central Asia. But at least there is a potential to cooperate, because both powers are interested in stability in Central Asia, and this is one of the common denominators which makes an appealing case for both.
Do you feel that with the withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan, the role of the US and the interest of the US in the Central Asian countries will decrease significantly?
Well, there is a serious concern that after the withdrawal of the US forces, the Afghanistan security issue will deteriorate. And that is why, for example, Afghanistan is now again rethinking the presence of US forces. Ashraf Ghani Ahmadzai, I think, will visit Obama, or is there in Washington, and I think they had announced that they will keep the military presence, and they will increase it in numbers. So that is why I think the US military presence is still there, and it should be considered as a factor. But there is sort of a contradictory point, because, you know, the Taliban is fighting against the US military presence. And while we see that Kabul is interested in keeping the US soldiers, it creates a stalemate, because you cannot talk to Taliban if the US forces are there. But there is also an understanding that if US forces will leave, it could create a total disaster when Taliban could take Kabul or could take different parts of the Afghanistan. And I think this is the issue, the dilemma we should solve by involving China and Russia and other forces. And China is actually very interested in mediating the inter-Afghan dialogue. And there were Taliban delegations visiting Beijing and having talks with Pakistani and Afghan officials, as reportedly, of course, as far as I see from the press. As for the Central Asian states, of course, they are very concerned with this issue, and in terms of the official discourse, Afghanistan again is returning back to its own place, and it creates a platform for cooperation between Central Asian states themselves. It creates a platform for cooperation, for example, between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan is also interested in inter-regional cooperation.
And definitely the Ukrainian crisis, as you said, it influenced a lot the situation, but you touched on the issue of the relations with the third countries. But do you feel that it changed the perception of the threats in the Central Asia? Because many of the Central Asian countries have quite a serious Russian minority, plus military bases, and Baikonur, for example, as well, as cannot be any analog to Crimean Black Sea Fleet, for example, what is at Baikonur or some other places. So do you feel that countries started to be careful about these issues and really perceive them as possible threats for their national security?
Well, it's very paradoxical, because in the aftermath of the Ukrainian crisis, the reaction was very sort of alarmistic in Central Asian states, and many of them started to reconsider their foreign security or security perception, because many of the Central Asian states waited this threat from Afghanistan, but then it came from other part of the region. But as the conclusion the states made is that despite the crisis in Ukraine and despite the Russian role, we should again work very tightly with Russia, because, for example, after the sanctions which hit Russia and after the low oil prices which hit Russia, for example, Kazakh economy was affected with it as well, and after the Russian ruble was devaluated, it crucially affected our economy. So that is why we developed an understanding that if our neighbors are weak, we are becoming even weaker. So that is why, in any case, we're working again with Russia. We are not turning our back. But again, we are feeling that we should develop our relations in equal terms with others, such as US, such as EU, such as China. And that is why we feel that multi-vector foreign policy, which Kazakhstan tries to develop within this 20-year perspective, is the real efficient tool which we stick into in the future.
And as a conclusion, do you see this new reality as more cooperative or more competitive?
Well, I think there is a lot of potential for cooperation, and as I've noted, there could be a cooperation between Russia and China. What will be the role of the US? I think in 2014 the role of the US was less discussed in the region, and many of us basically focus on Russia and China, and focusing on, for example, on Iranian issues. And the new strategy which US announced recently, and the EU, for example, recently appointed a special representative for Central Asia, still shows that these powers are committed to Central Asia, and they try to develop good relations. And actually, after the Ukrainian crisis, our president went to Brussels and signed the enhanced partnership with European Union. So that is why we are not sort of closing our doors to each of the states. And there is an understanding that only by working with all of them we could create sort of a stable region in Central Asia.
Thank you.